I'm Sherry Gleed. I'm the Dean here at NYU Wagner, and on behalf of NYU Wagner, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's debate. This is the second debate in an exciting new series we are delighted to present alongside our partners at the Century Foundation. We held our first debate just 3 weeks ago on the topic of free public college. Many of you were here in the audience, and it was an informative and engaging and even fun discussion, and I know tonight's debate will be the same. I also want to ask all of you to mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 26th for our final spring debate. That resolution will be, government should have lawful access to any encrypted message or device. I promise it will be an exciting and interesting discussion you won't want to miss. Details will be announced soon. Here at NYU Wagner, we have a long history of having an impact on public service, both here in New York City and around the globe. We've been educating and preparing the world's public service leaders for over 75 years. Through a curriculum that blends theory and practice, our students enhance their skills, build their networks, and have new experiences that enable them to address significant public problems and actually get things done. Our alumni all over the world apply their education to make real improvements in people's lives through healthcare, international development, urban planning, nonprofit management, finance, and many other fields. Part of making real improvements is understanding all perspectives on a problem, and conversations such as tonight's are vital to helping us all think through the big issues in public service today. These debates are an opportunity for thought leaders, practitioners, students, decision makers, and interested citizens to hear varied perspectives on relevant and timely issues. Tonight's topic on immigration is not just relevant to those of us in public service, but to the entire country. As the current presidential election indicates, immigration is a particularly contentious and critical issue. It's one that is especially meaningful to me personally. I'm an immigrant from Canada, and my parents were both immigrants to Canada, so I've always had a special concern for this particularly challenging area of policy. I want to offer a warm welcome to Marielena, David, and Jonathan, and thank them for being with us here tonight. Welcome. Marielena, you bring a unique, personal, and well-defined argument to this conversation, and I'm eager to hear what you have to say. And Jonathan, you're one of the country's premier and celebrated journalists, and I know you'll do an excellent job in keeping our debaters in line. And David, well, in the interest of full disclosure, I should let you know that I first met David Frum in 1975, when I was assigned the locker next to him in high school. That is to say, I knew David Frum when he was a founding member of the High School Anarcho-Syndicalist League, and I have the photos to prove it. Our paths have crossed many times since, and although we haven't always agreed about policy perspectives, we did benefit from the same history teachers, and we've always agreed on the value of thoughtful analysis and respectful debate. David and I went off to college together, and where we both met another Canadian expat, Tim Naftali, now on our faculty here, and he's been instrumental in organizing this debate. So this immigration debate is in a small way a mini reunion of three immigrants. Marielena, David, and Jonathan will all receive proper introductions shortly, but on behalf of NYU Wagner and the Century Foundation, we are thrilled to have you here to share your insights. I'm glad to see in the audience a cross-section of students and faculty and alumni from across NYU, as well as friends of the Century Foundation. This broad audience demonstrates the breadth and reach of both of our organizations and the importance of tonight's topic, and I'm very happy you could all join us.
We are very fortunate to have tonight a number of notable immigration and labor advocacy leaders, government officials, academics in the room. And we are blessed tonight to have not just one commissioner from NYU City, but two. Nisha Agarwal, Commissioner of the Mayor's Office of Immigration Affairs, is here. Welcome. Holly Trottenberg, Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, and my wife is here. Stephanie Yaski with the Mayor's Office on Immigration is here. Oh. And I want to give a shout out to my friend Michael Myers, who for years worked as Senator Kennedy's lead immigration strategist and longtime staff director, Michael Myers. Now I want to introduce our debaters for tonight. Marielena Hincapie will be arguing in favor of tonight's motion. She serves as the executive director of the National Immigration Law Center, the main organization defending and advancing the rights of low-income immigrants in the U.S. Under her executive leadership, the center has grown to be one of the premier immigrant rights organizations in the U.S. Marielena immigrated to the U.S. as a child from Colombia and is fully bilingual and bicultural. She is frequently interviewed by media outlets such as the Los Angeles Times, MSNBC, New York Times, and the Washington Post, among other publications. Her excellent legal and advocacy work is extensive and includes litigation of important legal precedent-setting cases, testifying before Congress, meeting with President Obama, or with low-income immigrant families. Marielena, come on up. Next, I would like to introduce Marielena's opponent for the evening, David Frum. David Frum is a senior editor at The Atlantic, where he writes on a range of national and international policy topics. He currently serves as chairman of the board of trustees of Policy Exchange, an independent evidence-based think tank in the UK. From 2001 to 2002, David served as a speechwriter and special assistant to President George Bush from 2007 to 2008, and he served as senior advisor to Rudy Giuliani's presidential campaign. He's the author of 8 books, the most recent of which is an e-book called Why Romney Lost, and his memoir of the Bush administration, The Right Man, was #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. His writing has been lauded by conservative leaders as the most refreshing ideological experience in a generation. David Frum, please come up. Finally, I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, Jonathan Alter. Jonathan is an award-winning author, reporter, columnist, television producer, and analyst. He's the author of 3 New York Times bestsellers and also wrote one of Time's notable books of the year. Since 1996, he has been an analyst and contributing television correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC. Jonathan also has an expansive reporting career. After 28 years as a columnist and senior editor of Newsweek, he is now a twice-monthly columnist for Daily Beast. His writings have appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Rolling Stone, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, Vanity Fair, the New Republic, Esquire, and other publications. He's the executive producer of Alpha House, a half-an-hour political comedy available on Amazon. And finally, Jonathan is a distinguished trustee at the Century Foundation, which makes him my boss, Jonathan Alter. Thank you.
Not your boss. Not your boss. Welcome, everybody. We've got a great crowd today. Distinguished crowd. More intelligence here than at any time since Thomas Jefferson dined alone. I think, talk about debates of the century. I mean, we know that immigration is going to be, already is, one of the great debates of the 20th century and the 21st century. And what, notwithstanding Sherry maybe putting her thumb on the scale a little bit for her old friend David, what we really want tonight is everybody to kind of take off their mental blocks and at least open yourselves up to the possibility that the people on the other side might have something important to say or important for you to consider as you puzzle through these issues. So we haven't, this debate is not between somebody on the far side of each position. Donald Trump is not with us here tonight, so it's more aimed at getting us all to think in a more sophisticated way about these issues. The way this is going to go is that each speaker will have a 5-minute opening statement and then a 3-minute rebuttal. And then at that point, I get to weigh in with questions, and you get to weigh in with questions. And then at the end, we'll have closing statements on the proposition. We're going to start tonight speaking in favor of the proposition is Marielena.
Great, thank you. Buenas noches. Thanks so much, Sherry and Mark, for the invitation to be here tonight, and Jonathan, thanks for moderating. I'm especially excited to be here tonight, and I thank all of you for making time for this important conversation and a debate about an issue that, frankly, in the presidential elections is not being debated. All we're hearing about is yelling, and facts do not matter. So we're really looking forward to a dialogue with all of you, and especially with David as well. I think it's great that the Century Foundation and NYU Wagner chose two immigrants to debate this issue, immigrant from the global south and an immigrant from the global north, to debate one of the most important issues in our country. And just to share a little bit about the National Immigration Law Center, it's an honor for me to lead the National Immigration Law Center, an organization that was founded specifically to help create opportunities for low-income immigrant families like mine. We believe that everyone in this country, everyone, regardless of where we were born or how much money we have, should have the same tools and opportunities to be able to achieve our full potential. Embracing the undocumented and expanded immigration is good for our country. I unequivocally support this motion for three reasons. One, it's good for the economy. Second, the status quo is untenable. And third, the alternative is too costly and actually undermines our American values. When my parents, Arturo and Teresa, decided to make the difficult decision to leave Colombia and come to the United States, they did so because they believed in the promise of America. Like many previous generations of immigrants, they came because they believed that their 10 children would have a better future in this country. Despite my father having a second grade education and my mother a fifth grade education, all 10 of us today are professionals, and we are contributing to this country in so many different ways. For example, my sister Marielena, a high school dropout and a single mother, is a biochemist today. She is working to find cures for obesity, asthma, cancer, and other illnesses. My brother Luis is a physical therapist who owns clinics in North Philly, and he is hiring and training formerly incarcerated individuals to help them reintegrate into their communities. Today we have 11.2 undocumented immigrants in this country who share our American values. But we have an out-of-date immigration system. Undocumented immigrants are not just some abstract category of people that Donald Trump wants to deport. They are Haitian, Mexican, Filipino workers who are taking care, perhaps many of your children or your elder parent. They are undocumented immigrants like Natalia, who I see in the room, one of our dreamer activists in the country. They are the mothers picking our fruits and vegetables that are helping you and me eat healthy meals. The majority have been here for over 10 years. They have US citizen children. They are working. They are paying taxes. They are part of our communities. They are part of our families. They're part of an essential social fabric for our society and for our future. So why should you vote in favor of this motion? First, if you don't care about anything else, it's good for the economy. Providing undocumented immigrants with work authorization and the ability to contribute even more to their families, their community, and our country benefits all of us. Currently, undocumented workers are contributing $13 billion every single year into the Social Security system. Second, if there's one thing that almost everyone agrees on, including Trump's supporters, is that the status quo is not sustainable. Look, let me level with you. 11 million people is a large number. If you're wondering how we got to this place, it's as simple as the old laws of supply and demand. Since the 1990s, there's been an increase in a demand for low-skilled wages. And instead of updating our immigration system, we've spent the last quarter deporting undocumented immigrants. Finally, the alternative is too costly, not just in dollars, but what it means in terms of undercutting our nation's American values. This is an issue that is so important that it spans political walls. Just earlier this month, the conservative American Action Forum found that if we were to deport all 11 million, it would cost you and me over between $400 and $600 billion and take us 20 years. Just think about that. Immigration is an issue that does not matter whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent. It's an issue that is about people, about families, about our economy, about our American values. Do not let the politics of fear guide our policy making on immigration or your vote tonight. Our current system is costly, impractical, and unworkable. We need to create policies that uphold our values of justice and fairness. Gracias.
David.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Sherry, for your kind words. Thank you, Tim, for organizing this, and thanks to all of you. I too am very pleased to be joining this format because despite the billing as a debate of the century, it is the debate of the century, and of the Century Foundation perhaps, but
I didn't say it was the debate, a debate of the century.
I also am pleased that it is organized in a way that it is not literally a debate, because a debate suggests that you face a binary choice, and you don't. Immigration is not a question of yes or no. It is a question of more or less. It is a question of who, when, and of what kind. The United States has run an immigration policy of a certain type, one that favors the world's least skilled people, and one that countenances an immigration flow that is more than 50% illegal. That's not the only way to do immigration. Other countries do it differently. Canada does it differently, and Australia does it differently. The United States is at one extreme end, with Sweden, of a spectrum of choices. And my proposal tonight is that what we need is not no immigration, but less, and not a radically different immigration policy, but a somewhat different immigration policy. One that does a better job protecting low-wage Americans from a harsh global economy, and does a better job of exposing highly paid Americans to the bracing winds of competition. American neurosurgeons do not have to worry about the effects of migration on their wages, but Americans with high school diplomas do, and increasingly Americans with 1 or 2 years of college do. I was born in Canada. In fact, as I was reviewing my family tree on the way up here, I realized that among my parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, there's only one who died in the same country in which he was born. That was my father. The verdict is still out on me. And my wife's family, too, are a family of migrants, in her case from Australia. I don't know whether you could call her ancestors truly migrants because they didn't come to Australia entirely voluntarily. But it is a fact of the world. The question is what kind and how much. Immigration is often presented. Immigration, first of all, we must remember, is a policy. Some countries have it, some countries don't. And some countries have it in larger quantities, and some countries have it in smaller quantities. What kind of policy is it? And in whose interest should it be run? It is often presented as the only policy on the menu with all benefits and no costs. The policy equivalent of a free lunch. And that can't be true. Every policy has costs. What are the costs of immigration and who bears them? What are the benefits and who captures them? As the policy is run today, the largest capture of migration benefits are captured by the migrants to the United States themselves. Those people who are fortunate enough or bold enough to take advantage of the opportunities or to seize illegal opportunities. They are the largest beneficiaries from America's current migration policy. The next beneficiaries are owners of capital assets and highly compensated people who benefit from an increase in the availability of products and an improvement in their purchasing power. The costs are borne by, as so often the case in American public policy, by the lower 2/3 of society, and especially by the lower 1/3. What you are being asked to endorse with this motion is yet another of the many policy choices the United States makes that is upwardly economically redistributionist. And that is just a fact, measured again and again and again. One of the striking things about the measuring of migration and its costs is how much of that measurement has been done by people who are themselves foreign-born. I played a small part in this debate. The greatest part is played by a Cuban-born economist, George Borjas. Thinking critically about immigration's cost to Americans seems to be one of those jobs Americans just won't do. But it does have costs. Now, you may in the end decide the benefits exceed the costs, but do not let anybody tell you that there are no costs and that the costs are not substantial. One of the things that economists agree about immigration is the net impact of immigration on the American economy is small. And I think that's probably right. But that small net effect is made up of a very, very large transfer to the top and a very, very large deduction from the bottom. When you aggregate, you get a small net positive. But is that really the way you want to do economic policy? If it is, I have a tax cut to sell you.
Okay. Since I think you agree with Marielena that the status quo is not acceptable, what would your immigration policy look like?
My immigration policy would be a series of incremental changes. I would begin first of all by having a policy that reduced visa applicants for relatives of those here, and I would be especially skeptical of those who are not husbands, wives, and children. I'd be skeptical of parents, and I'd be skeptical of siblings. I would have an immigration policy that was quite open for people with very high levels of skill. I would certainly oppose the idea of this famous idea of stapling a green card to every college diploma, because that would, I think, invite even more abuse of the American higher education. That would invite a lot of immigration abuses. For those who are now undocumented, I wouldn't do much, actually. I would have a policy that of non-amnesty. I would accept that the children of those who are here illegally will become legal in time themselves. I think it's possible to imagine that through enforcement at the workplace, many will go home. The most important element of my policy would be enforcement in the workplace. I think it needs, what we need is a system where when somebody applies for a job, there is an immediate way to verify that that person is eligible to work in the United States, and I can go into more details about how I designed that. And if an enterprise employs people who are not eligible to work, I would want to see some quite severe penalties. And I think you would not need to prove, as is now the case, that the employer knew that the person was illegal. For most labor market infractions, they're per se violations. You don't have to know that the person is under the age of adulthood when you employ a minor. If the person is a minor, you're penalized. And if you say, but I thought they looked grown up to me, that's not a good enough answer. And that would be my approach to these questions. I think one of the reasons that people in my party, the Republican Party, are attracted to this concept of a border wall is it's a way to avoid incommoding employers, but employers are really the central actors in this question, and it is upon them that enforcement action must fall.
So what do you think of the wall and border enforcement in general?
I think in selected areas, a wall can be useful. I think we've had good results from the wall south of San Diego. Mostly it looks like a giant boondoggle to me. I mean, again, there are places where it makes sense, but to build a wall all along the border is just a way of evading the main responsibility, which is to have enforcement at the workplace and meaningful sanctions on employers of illegal labor.
Just one more follow-up, and then I'll turn it over here. A lot of people think you have it exactly backwards. That the real problem is we're letting in too many high-skilled workers through the H-1B program, and that there are American engineers, for instance, who are being harmed by that. Whereas at the low-skill level, you do not see organized labor, for instance, being very critical of these policies in recent years. They used to be, because they don't feel that their target members are losing their jobs. And you admit in the Atlantic that the evidence is very divided among economists as to how much impact there is on low-wage employment.
Well, let me put it this way. One of the things that we see in the American economy is we've had a tremendous increase. As Marielena said, it's a matter of supply and demand. That we've seen a tremendous increase in the ratio of CEO pay to that of ordinary workers. That tells me that we have a terrible shortage of potential CEOs because they're able to raise their pay so much, and a serious surplus of people at the lower levels. What I mean by high skill immigration is not H-1B immigration. It is the levels above that. The people who we now call distinguished entrances in the sciences and the arts, people with really special skills. I agree with you. The H-1B program is a series of abuses, and I don't think I want to see that expanded. But what I do want to make sure is that when you have distinguished scientists, when you have executive level talent, when companies need to move people who are earning significant salaries, I think we can have a little bit more bracing competition at the $250,000 and above level. I sometimes speculate that, why not completely deregulate any job that pays more than $250,000 a year? Let them in, because those people need the bracing winds of competition, evidently, because they wouldn't be able to raise their pay so much otherwise. But at the impact on the bottom of the workforce, I don't think it's true. I'm not going to argue that immigration is the most important reason, or even the second most important reason that people in the bottom of the economic distribution have been having so much difficulty lately. But it makes it difficult, and the impact in the future is going to be even worse. The thing I worry about a lot is as we have this ever-increasing migration flow, we've doubled the number of migrants since 1990, even legal migrants, and the Gang of Eight that failed would have doubled the legal number again in the years after 2010. What happens to a country that takes in these enormous numbers of very low-skilled workers as the robotics revolution bites? I think all of us, we're all children and grandchildren of immigrants, and we all have that Statue of Liberty image in our mind and that story in our heads. But the world of the 21st century, the labor markets of the 21st century, are not going to resemble that of the 19th century. The gap, the cultural and skills gap between the developed world and the underdeveloped world is getting wider all the time, harder to navigate. And the people who we are bringing in today from very poor backgrounds with very low skills, they are not ascending, they're not achieving upward mobility, that is just documentable. And they are going to be exposed to, and at the cost of the American taxpayer and the American social welfare system, economic changes in the years ahead that are really daunting.
So you disagree with your old boss, Rudy Giuliani, who believed that immigrants basically saved New York City, particularly in the outer boroughs?
I pleaded with Rudy Giuliani to deliver a tough on immigration speech. As so often in my career, my excellent advice has been disregarded. I got a lot of, but I think what happened in New York City, what has happened in specific places is a very different thing from what has happened in the country as a whole. And I think across the country there's problem after problem after problem that is made more difficult by very high levels of unskilled immigration.
Marielena, by the way, after I ask you a couple of questions, you should both feel free to jump in at any time that somebody is saying something you find objectionable. Yeah, what limits would you impose? Are there no limits? How would you envision a coherent immigration policy moving forward? For instance, David notes in one of his articles that Nigeria by mid-century is going to have 400 million people, pass the United States in population. There is enormous pressure around the world, as we all know, to emigrate, and an awful lot of people who want to come to the United States. Where are the limits?
So I completely agree with David that immigration is not binary. It's actually very complicated, and I think we all agree that we need an immigration system that we actually can manage. So first and foremost, and I think this is where David and I don't agree, is we have 11 million people in our country who have U.S. citizen children, who are running small businesses, that are taxpayers. We have to address that issue first and foremost, right? So let's provide legalization. I think the fact that David is suggesting that we have a status quo only is going to benefit employers. I mean, we agree on this. I think the folks who benefit the most from the status quo of an undocumented population are employers who are benefiting from the labor. And in fact, if we really want to address the issue of future undocumented immigration, it's not just about enforcing the immigration laws in the workplace. Actually, it's enforcing the labor laws in the workplace. If employers knew that they were not going to be able to get away with violating minimum wage laws and not paying workers' comp and having workers off the books, etc., that is what creates the incentive for employers, that small group of bad employers who are actually getting an economic advantage over all the other employers that are trying to play by the books. So labor enforcement, that actually lifts up the boat for everyone. And we should really be thinking about immigration as that, not something that just affects the immigrant worker, but how do we use immigration policy to lift the floor for everyone so that we have an economy that is actually prospering. I think secondly, the reason I say we should expand immigration is when we look at what's happening in Europe and in other parts of the country and in the world, like Japan and other countries that have an aging population, and they don't have the immigrant worker base or the worker base that's helping the economy keep afloat. Here in the US, we have the opposite problem. Undocumented workers, because of the $13 billion that they are contributing to the Social Security system, and they're keeping they're subsidizing the Medicare system actually, that actually helps to support not just as care workers who are taking care of our elders and our aging population, but also working to make sure that the economy continues to function. So I think that we need to then look at what levels of legal immigration do we need, and that's going to vary. I mean, I think it's crazy that for an issue like immigration that's impacted by economic policies, foreign policies, trade, environmental, and so many other factors, that we're not updating our immigration laws for 25 years or longer. We should really be managing immigration law on a regular basis every 2, 3, 5 years and calibrating how many immigrants do we allow or not.
On that 13 billion figure, so that's on the plus side of the ledger, but as David points out, there are costs. So how do you assess the costs, and what do you put those costs
Yes.
at? What do you include in your assessment
Yep.
of them?
So the $13 billion figure is actually contributions to the Social Security system. That's a figure from the Social Security Administration. And the net is actually $12 billion. So one billion of that is being used by immigrants with respect to Social Security contributions. But there are many other, right? There is always a cost-benefit analysis. I think the majority of economists, and there are many US-born economists that are willing to do the work, actually find, except for Bodehouse and a small minority of folks, that the costs outweigh, the benefits outweigh the costs.
So wait, so you're saying that only $1 billion a year, which is a tiny, bar bill in the American economy, is taken out?
With respect to the Social Security
from the Social
contributions.
Security, but how about other costs that are associated with services that are used by undocumented workers, and the healthcare system is the one that is most often cited.
Sure. I mean, with the healthcare system in particular, as folks may know, undocumented immigrants are actually excluded from Obamacare. So even in a capitalist society, if you are undocumented, you can't pay out of pocket into the federal marketplace. Second, folks are eligible for emergency Medicaid. So that's where we see the cost. And that's definitely a cost, and we believe that shouldn't be the way that it's functioning. We believe that if you are in the United States and you are paying taxes, you are a child or you are a worker, you should be covered by our healthcare
But
system.
do you have any idea of what the burden is, what the cost is in the emergency room?
There aren't actual concrete numbers that I
There's
can
no
point
studies
to at
on
the
that.
moment,
That's
right,
studies
that are
on-
accurate.
Of course they're concrete.
What do you think the numbers are?
And this is one of the places where we need to be accurate about the costs. First, immigrant households. The immigrant households that the United States takes right now are dramatically more likely than native-born households to receive some kind of means-tested benefit. The majority of immigrant households receive some kind of means-tested benefit. Now, that is not true of all immigrant groups equally, and this goes back to my question of which groups do you take? Immigrants from South Asia are dramatically less likely to receive means-tested benefits than the native-born. Immigrants from Latin America, and especially Central America, are dramatically more likely. And in the aggregate, they are substantially more likely. This claim that a society, a welfare state, needs immigrants in order to sustain its social insurance system, it needs to be examined in some detail. It is often made, it's a claim often made, and it overlooks an essential human fact, which is that immigrants also get old. So it is true that if you look at a 27-year-old childless man, you will find that his net contributions into the social insurance system exceed his net take at that moment. But over that person's, the American social insurance system is massively redistributionist over our life cycle. And because of the generosity of the Medicare program, what we receive in the years after 65, for most of us, greatly exceeds what we pay in. And for those who are low skilled and low paid, it dramatically exceeds. So you need a life cycle analysis to know this immigrant who you're taking in at age 27 and who's going to be a contributor comes with a massive future contingent liability attached to him. Will his earnings and his tax payments in his working career or her working career suffice to meet the claims that this person, if legal, will make after age 65?
But they don't for native born either. You get back
They
a lot
don't.
more than you pay in.
They don't for most native-born people. So, as I said, immigration is not the only problem, but it makes all the problems worse by dramatically, the present immigration policies of the United States do is lower the average skill level of the American population in total, lower the average skill level, widen the gap, the pay gap between the top and the bottom. It's already true that we run over the life cycle a very redistribution system. This is going to become even more difficult. But to say that that person is a net contributor because he's a net contributor before his children are born and before his health claims arrive is just to overlook basic accounting. That person is going to be a huge cost, and his earnings over his lifetime, if he's low skilled, as most of the immigrants the United States now takes, and almost all of the illegal immigrants that the United States is asked to accept, that person is going to impose huge costs. As I said, half the immigrant households take means-tested benefits, and that is in a situation where most of the undocumented do not qualify for many means-tested benefits, although they do qualify for some. The earned income tax credit is often taken by immigrants. The child tax credit is taken by immigrants. And while they don't qualify as yet for the benefits under the Affordable Care Act, the emergency room provisions are incredibly expensive and heavily used by the illegal.
So you seem to be suggesting that we should make distinctions between regions of the world in our immigration policy.
That's just
is
a
that
guide.
right?
No, I'm not. That's just a guideline. I mean, it just happens.
But isn't that the implication of what you're
No.
suggesting, that you would take more from South Asia because
No, I'm saying
they're less of a burden?
the profile of the people who come from South Asia is a highly educated profile.
But you wouldn't want that to have, you wouldn't want that to drive policy?
What I
The
would-
reason I'm asking the question is that between the Immigration Act of 1924 and the Immigration Act of 1965, in that period, you were basically only allowed in if you came from certain countries.
I
And
want to
then
say you're only
after
allowed in
that-
if you meet certain qualifications. As we do it today,
So you have to have some money to come.
you'd have to have some money, some skills. You'd have to show. I would think it would be just reasonable to say there has to be a good showing that you will be a net contributor to the American social insurance system over your life cycle.
But you're not even sure you want asylum to be an exception to that, right?
No, I have a role. Asylum is different, but I think we need to acknowledge that the way the asylum system has recently been used, especially in Europe, is a migration system in disguise. Obviously, if an individual has an individuated, well-founded fear of persecution for an unalterable characteristic, that person needs asylum somewhere, maybe in the United States, maybe Canada, Australia, or Europe. That is not the way the present migration system is working. The point of the reason I instance South Asians is not because there's something better about people from South Asia than North Asia. It's that those people who happen to come from the United States, from South Asia, happen to meet a certain profile where they become strong net contributors. That's just a for instance. It would be possible to have a migration policy from Latin America where those people from Latin America we took were people who met that same profile. As it happens, that those are not the people that are taken. The highly skilled Latin Americans tend to stay home. It is the low skilled Latin Americans that the United States takes, and that has huge consequences for the future of the American social insurance system.
Jonathan, if I could just clarify a couple of points, because I think especially one of the benefits of a debate like this is to have a dialogue and to educate, right? So one of the biggest problems on immigration, as I mentioned earlier, are facts don't seem to matter. So means-tested programs, undocumented immigrants are not eligible for means-tested programs. Over half of the families that David is talking about or referring to, actually it's because their U.S. citizen children are qualified because they are U.S. citizen children. Earned income tax credit, child tax credit, that is not a means-tested program. Earned income tax credit and child tax credit programs basically are programs that because you are working in the United States, you are eligible, and if you have U.S. citizen children who are eligible for this program, then you can apply for the credit. But it's because of the child that makes you eligible for that. The USDA statistics actually show the complete opposite of what David has just talked about. For example, for the SNAP program, the supplemental, which is what people think of as food stamps program, only 55% of eligible children, again, these are the US citizen children who are eligible, only 1 out of every 2 are actually applying and getting SNAP benefits or food stamp programs. And why? Because their parents are undocumented and are afraid of applying for any benefit that benefits a child, and it's because they're applying to the federal government as an undocumented person. The fear that people have that if they provide any information to the federal government will result in them being identified, detained, and deported means that that child, that US citizen child, is not getting basic food that they need to develop into healthy adults. And second, if you compare the USDA statistics, 55%, so 1 out of every 2 US citizen children of undocumented immigrants are applying in comparison to 86% of native born. So again, the numbers really do matter, and these are the statistics from the actual government agencies that administer these programs.
I want to ask you something about politics, the political implications of all this. So in the 2012 election, which I covered and wrote about in a book, it was my understanding that one of the reasons that there was that Obama got 71% of the Latino vote was that the families that had come forward with their dreamers under DACA felt like they had identified themselves. They'd come out of the shadows to apply to be in this program, and then under his later executive order, these other programs, and that if the Republicans were to win, they would be very easy to identify and deport, easier to deport. Do you think that was a big motivating factor, that the stakes went up because of these programs that they had applied for?
Absolutely. So what happened in 2012 is the following. Between 2010 and 2012, actually throughout the Obama administration, President Obama has deported more people, over 2 million people, more than any previous administration. Just think about this for a minute. 2 million people is the numerical equivalent of Boston, Miami, Seattle, and Salt Lake City. If you combined those populations, that would be what President Obama has deported. And that included a lot of dreamers, despite what President Obama and Secretary Napolitano were saying. And again, I see Natalia, one of the best dreamers in the country here, who personally brought files of those dreamers, young immigrants who've been here their entire life, who consider themselves American that were in fact being deported. When President Obama announced in June of 2012 that he was going to provide this temporary protection from deportation, it's only a temporary program that provides them work authorization, that infused a level of hope, and in the Latino community in particular, people came out to vote, but not just because they were voting for Obama, but because they were voting against Mitt Romney, who was talking about self-deportation as the solution at the time, which frankly sounds so much milder than what we're dealing with today. So it was the combination. It was the combination of the two.
Just something that has to be said about this claim that President Obama's been a deporter in chief. That's really a statistic. It's not true, and it's a statistical artifact. What happened before the Obama administration was that apprehensions and returns at the border tended not to be counted. So as gearing up for his big immigration initiative, President Obama, one of his first demands was more comprehensive record keeping. Tally everybody, even if they've only been on American soil for 16 minutes, tally everybody. And so when you tally everybody, instead of tallying only the people deported from the interior, you get a much bigger number.
Do you know how much bigger? How many are
I don't have.
apprehended at the border?
It is known. I don't happen to know it off the top of my head. What I do know is that that number actually was generally not even counted during previous administrations. People who were apprehended within an hour or two were just sent back, and no one took a note of it, or at least it didn't go into any official statistic. So it's a complete statistical artifact. It's not true. And in the Obama administration, enforcement in the interior of the United States simply plunged. And part of that was because of the terrible recession, there were fewer people working in the United States in every category, including migrants. But part of it was policy. But the suggestion that we have been, that President Obama has been enforcing immigration laws more rigorously than any president before him, it doesn't meet this common sense test, and in fact, it's not true.
So let's clarify a couple of things, because I think we're conflating different pieces. So David is absolutely right that since 2007, things changed because of the recession. What changed is that the undocumented migration to the United States has leveled off. Remember that law of supply and demand? There aren't enough jobs anymore, people aren't coming. That is true. So the number of people coming to the US and being apprehended at the border changed.
Is it true, just, let me interrupt you for
Yeah.
a second, because you hear so much in these Republican debates about, illegal immigrants flowing over the border. Isn't it true that there are actually more people going from the north to the south than from
Yes,
the south to the
and in
north?
fact,
Is that a
people go-
fact?
Absolutely.
More people go from
Was
the
a
United
fact.
States to Mexico than from Mexico to the
It's
United
not
States?
back to the.
Yes, and
It was,
there's a
but
net
no longer
zero
is?
migration from Mexico. We have an increase in Central American migration, but that's for separate reasons. But yes, since 2007, there is a net zero migration of undocumented immigrants coming to the U.S. The other thing that did
We've
change,
been
and I think
arguing
this
about
is
nothing in our politics.
absolutely. That's why I said earlier that facts do not seem to matter in this on this issue, especially. The other thing that definitely changed is actually, and this is I think one of the things David was alluding to, is prior to President Obama's administration, people were turned away. They got voluntary departure at the border. Now, people are actually getting final orders of deportation at the border for a deterrence purpose. There's actually more consequences. If you're detained at the border, there's actually a record. You're fingerprinted. That means that in the future, if you try to come lawfully, it actually hinders you from being able to do
the
that.
wrong policy?
No, that is actually the right policy, and that's actually a big change from previous administrations. The second piece, and this is where it's not an artificial factor, there's a reason. This is a progressive or liberal, depends on what your perspective is on President Obama. This is a liberal Democratic administration. There's a reason why immigrants have pushed him so hard to say he is a deporter-in-chief, not because it's an artificial fact, because we're feeling the pain in our communities, because our children are growing up traumatized, because when they go to school they worry or whether they're going to see their mother at the end of the day, or whether she's going to have been detained by immigration agents when she goes to pick her up at school.
Let's just
It's
drill
not-
into this argument a little bit,
I-
because, the Trump types use fear a lot.
Yes.
Isn't David right that there is some exaggeration here? You talked about Seattle and Boston and Salt Lake City. That implies that there's a lot of knock, knock, knock in the middle of the night. You got a parking ticket, you're out of here.
Yes.
But really the bulk of it are these apprehensions at the border. Or do you have any evidence that the knock, 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 you have a parking ticket, you're out of here, is substantially increased over what it was in the Bush era?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is
What are those
plenty
numbers?
of evidence. So the numbers are, since 2003, interior enforcement has increased to the point that we do have immigration agents going to people's homes. I mean, just January of this year, the Obama administration decided the second day of the year, we had half a dozen to a dozen immigration agents going to people's homes, grabbing mothers in their pajamas out of bed and putting them into detention and in deportation proceedings.
Half a dozen to a dozen, that's a tiny.
Immigration agents.
Tiny,
No,
tiny number.
immigration agents. This is immigration agents going to
Oh,
a person's
at one
home.
time, okay.
At one time
So
to
these were
detain one mother.
All over the United States, this
It
was going on?
happened in North Carolina, in Texas, in Illinois, in a number of states, which was the first pilot that the administration started this year. But that's not. It's not new, right? This is what's been happening throughout the administration for the last 8 years. I mean, there's a reason that immigrant advocates that have been big supporters of President Obama have held him accountable, because we are feeling that pain in our communities. When teachers tell you that one of their students didn't show up for 1-2 weeks, and when she finally tried to figure out what was happening, she finds out that her 8th grade student didn't show up because they were taking care of their younger siblings because both parents had been deported. There's a problem in this country.
Is there a number on the increase over the Bush administration in interior deportations?
I don't have the
Percentage increase, is it at
exact-
5%, 50%, 10%?
No, it's a lot more. It's the equivalent. I'd have to take a look at the statistics, Jonathan, but it's on average, it's been about 150 to 200,000 per year, more so than the previous administration. And not just the Bush administration, but previous administrations, including the Clinton administrations. It's not just a Democratic or a Republican issue. And I think in large part, this was President Obama's strategy from the beginning, was that if he was really tough on undocumented immigrants, that would bring Republicans to the table. And in fact, that didn't work. It was a failed failed strategy, but what did happen is many children ended up in foster homes because their US citizen parents were deported.
So first half of his time in office, first term, not so good, second term, good?
I'd say the first
Is that-
6 years. First
First
6 years.
6 years?
Yes, yeah, from
Okay.
2009 all the way till
So that's,
2014.
so that's past DACA.
Yes, it wasn't until the end of 2014, in November of 2014, when after a lot of pressure, President Obama finally decided that they were going to change the priorities for deportation, that they were going to exercise what's called prosecutorial discretion, which is what every law enforcement agency in the country does every single day. We have limited resources. The administration gets the appropriations to be able to deport about 400,000 people per year. So that's what they've been doing on average, between 300 and 400,000 a year, but there are 11 million people who are undocumented, and so the administration finally, after a lot of political pressure, decided that yes, they were going to use those resources and not deport, provide temporary protection for the parents of US citizen children who've been here for at least 5 years, who have, can prove that they've been here, can go through a criminal background check, pay a fee, and come forward. Now, that's been blocked.
So
so
David,
far.
is that, a federal judge in Texas said that Obama's executive order was unconstitutional?
Yes.
Do you think he was right?
Yes.
Why?
The president has the authority to enforce the laws. If the president of the United States says, look, I've got a limited number of IRS agents, and I'm only going to look at tax claims that are in excess of $2 million. That's a legitimate exercise of prosecutorial discretion, concentrating resources where they'll do the most good. If the president said, I am just not going to enforce the tax laws anymore, I don't believe in taxes, I think taxes are theft, I'm not going to do it. That is not prosecutorial discretion, that is an executive non-compliance with a whole statute and scheme of Congress. So when the president says, I'm not going to enforce immigration laws against anybody, that is not something the president can do. He can enforce them first in what he regards as higher priority cases and later in lower priority cases. He can't just veto a law that was passed by Congress and signed by his predecessors.
He's not saying.
He can't
he's not
nullify
saying
an entire.
You won't continue to deport criminals. That's a pretty
Well, first we have to.
significant drain on law enforcement.
The president
resources.
is saying he will not deport criminals. He's saying he will not deport felons. That people who have multiple misdemeanors, including vehicular homicide cases, are not going to be deported. Only felons will be deported. A lot of people who we would ordinarily think of as pretty nasty characters are going to be allowed to remain under the president.
Those are mostly felonies. It's pretty nasty. If vehicular manslaughter is somebody accidentally runs somebody over, so his family should be split up and sent back.
The point is we have a lot of cases of vehicular homicide, and and the immigrant population is disproportionately likely to get to be involved in that. And when you say no criminals, we just need to be clear that we are using this in a technical term that will exempt a lot of people that most of us will think of as bad actors. I want to go to this point about illegal migration flows, because again, there are statistical artifacts here. I mean, one of the things we are all, as people involved in the academic world to one degree or another, users of statistics. And in our field, we are often aware of how statistics are made. But outside our field, we often are not aware of how they're made, and so we don't see their inherent problems. Immigration statistics are collected with a tremendous lag, 2 to 3 years. So the numbers you're hearing about, and of course they're always very imprecise, and not, they rely on survey data with people who often don't want to be found. The immigration numbers we're looking at for illegal immigration, we don't know exactly how many illegal immigrants there are, we don't know how many are entering, we don't know how many are leaving. We're taking samples. And the samples that at least I am seeing are at this point from, at best, 2013. It is true, there was a collapse in immigration flows and some exits in 2009 because of the terrible economy. But what has been happening as the economy has revived, and this is one of the reasons I think this issue has become so white hot in this year, and more white hot this year than in 2016. We are seeing an increase in migration flows, not so much from Mexico, but from Central America. Increasingly also from the poorer parts of East Asia, and that is going to be, I think, a bigger and bigger trend in the years ahead. Increasingly from Africa, that's going to be, as airline costs fall, that's going to be a bigger trend. And what we're also seeing, and here's a way to register the impact of migration, is very large and increasing displacement of native-born workers from the workforce. The proportion of men aged 18 to 54 in work today is at the lowest level since 1947. The net, when we look at the net new job creation, compare the number of jobs in the American economy today, the private sector today, as compared to 2007, the last peak, that we can see that the majority of net new jobs created since 2007 have gone to foreign-born people. And we have seen a dramatic decline in labor force participation among black men under 30. So you go through area after area of the American labor force, and what you see is, in certain areas, immigration is an absolutely colossal fact, replacing native-born
Can
workers
you give us
with
a
foreign-born
statistic
workers.
on what the decline is for African Americans under 30?
I can't give you the number off the top of my head, but it's really startling.
My understanding was it's been pretty consistent
No,
for decades.
The labor force participation rate among African Americans under 30 has peaked in the late 90s. It's been declining, and they have been especially a target of this displacement effect, where net new jobs, again, the majority of net new jobs go to the foreign-born. So it's a large thing, and this idea, when someone tells you something that just doesn't correspond to any of your daily experience, there's got to be some deeper explanation. It is just incredible to imagine that President Barack Obama deported more people than any of his predecessors. That just doesn't sound true, and it's not true. What you're seeing are statistical effects, and we do not have a large-scale pattern deportation, in part because, and this is it's not a partisan issue. Congress and Republicans are complicit in this too. The most ambitious recent experiment in enforcement of the labor laws occurred in about the year 2000. The meat packing industry, which once provided a lot of quite highly paid, often unionized jobs, it relocated itself from the downtowns of big cities to the suburbs of big cities, and then out to these railway nodes out in the far countryside. As late as the 1990s, that was a predominantly African American industry with relatively high wages. Beginning in the late 1990s, all of that labor was displaced by migrant. It's now an almost completely migrant-dominated industry. And in the year 2000, the Labor Department, in the last year of the Clinton administration, began a crackdown on practices in the meatpacking industry. And they raided factories, they called for papers, they did all the things that you just described. They rounded up people and they sent people home. And immediately, Congress defunded their actions because the meatpackers have clout. It's just not going on that we're having these large-scale deportations. What we don't have is the enforcement of labor laws at the workplace that would obviate the need for deportation in the first place. Deportation is like the wall. It is the clumsiest and most expensive way to do something that should happen naturally, which is to regulate the labor market by saying when you go to apply for a job, you should be asked to produce at least a tamper-proof ID that establishes that you have a right to work in the United States, and if you don't have that tamper-proof ID and the employer employs you anyway, that employer should pay serious penalties just on that fact with no need to show the employer was aware that had guilty knowledge.
So you agree that the employer should have tougher sanctions, but what should happen to the worker?
So I think the workers are here. There should be a legalization programs that allow folks who are in the United States, who have ties to our communities, who can prove that they've been here and pass background checks, they should be able to come forward and apply for
But
legalization.
they're not going to be employable. If the crackdown that you both seem to be agreeing on were put into effect, who's going to employ in a legal fashion the undocumented workers who are working in that meatpacking?
Well, when folks are legalized, they will be employable, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying. We have to address these issues separately. One is, let's address the fact that we have 11 million people in our country that have deep ties, that have U.S. citizen children. They're not going away. Look, Arizona, Georgia, Alabama, they've tried this through state laws. They tried to crack down through multiple ways. We've sued Arizona, Utah, Indiana, Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama, and we've settled all of those lawsuits in federal court. They've been found unconstitutional. And the economic cost for those states has been huge. So again, cracking down on undocumented immigrants is not the answer. Legalization is the answer with respect to them. Now, in terms of
Incentives
the
matter.
future,
You legalize 11 million, you will have 11 million more illegals tomorrow because they will see this system. This is the second amnesty. We did one in 1986. You do a second one, there will be a third and a fourth because the message will be clear. Amnesties occur at regular intervals.
no,
That's
what's
it.
missing from the
Address the
1986
1986.
Absolutely. What's missing so there are a couple of things. Part of, again, the reason we have an undocumented population is because there weren't legal channels for people to come. So unless we both legalize immigrants who are here, undocumented immigrants, and secondly, look at what are our needs, what are the labor market needs, and figure out what is the right number in terms of future legal immigration, otherwise we will repeat the same mistakes of the past. So that's definitely true. I think the other piece that I wanted to get to is, again, in our country, we are having important conversations, not just about immigration, but about economic inequality and about racial injustices. The fact that there is such a high number of unemployed and underemployed Black workers and Latino workers and other workers is not because of immigration or immigrant workers. We're taking the employer power out of the equation, right? It's employers who are making decisions they're the ones who are depressed in working conditions. They're the ones who are making decisions to hire and exploit an undocumented worker over a US worker. What we actually need in this country is investment in communities of color, not disinvestment, as has happened on a whole range of issues. So there's a whole other debate. I'm sorry, David, let me just finish. David, let me just finish this point, which is our country is, and workers are facing and experiencing, I mean, look, people who are supporting Trump, they're supporting him on one hand because of their fear of the other and the demographic changes in the country, but also because they are experiencing economic pain that we have to deal with. The fact that you have white people in this country, especially white men, committing suicide at record levels has to be dealt with. None of those issues are due to immigration, though. It's not displacement by immigrant workers. It is a disinvestment in domestic policies in communities, especially at the working class level.
He's not committing suicide because he didn't get that job cleaning a swimming pool, is he?
Look, the question of what's going on is tremendously complicated, and I don't want to offer any kind of monocausal explanation for this horrific social tragedy. But what we clearly are seeing is a massive deterioration in all kinds of both material and psychic benefits of living in the bottom 2/3 of American society. And I think that's our single most important social problem. And Americans owe a duty of care to their fellow Americans first, not to the rest of the planet second, if at all. But what Marielena is saying here, having called for us to pay attention to the law of supply and demand, she then ignores it. It is all the things that you want to have happen cannot happen in a world of high and continuing migration flows. Capital and labor are substitutable one for another. If you have huge flows of very low skilled labor, you will not have investment because it will be irrational. When people can hire people to pick grapes very cheaply, they do not substitute grape picking machines that can be operated at a higher level of productivity and pay a higher wage. You are not going to be able to enforce the labor laws you want to see enforced in a situation where so many people who are entering the country are here on conditional legality or worse. And if you have an amnesty today, you will have more illegal immigrants tomorrow. The question of supply and demand, is always contingent on the price. We say, what is the demand in the United States for very, very low wage labor? And the answer is it's infinite. Just as the demand for any good at a free or nearly free price is infinite. The demand goes down as the price goes up. That we regulate labor because, unlike my libertarian friends who call for the free movement of people and goods and investment, I think there's something different about people. People aren't goods; they're not traded commodities. And your fellow citizens have a special claim on you, and it is their interests that must come first. As one of the things that runs this debate from the beginning is this question of costs and benefits. Who should evaluate them? So this is a debate that is uniquely seen from the point of view of winners. And it's a debate, and that's one of the things that is kind of, although we're both immigrants, we are both also among life's winners and American society's winners. And for both of us, the world as it's organized, it's a much more pro-winner world than the world of 1955 was. But if you want to have a world that does not reward the winners as much as it does, if you want to go back to that world of 1955, you have to understand that immigration restriction was, not alone, but with other things, one of the things that made possible a world in which the winners won. They continued to win. It was always a free society, but they won a little bit less. The demand and the idea that you're going to say, we are going to think about the labor market from the point of view of the labor market consumers. I say, you will never have any immigration
I
regulation.
don't think that a lot of economists would say that immigration policy in the 30s led to less social stratification, that it was government policy in the New
I
Deal.
invite everybody to read Jackson Cowie, a very left-wing historian, interesting book on this.
We're gonna take some questions from all of you, but I wanted to start with one from, I believe it's Paula McKinnon. Just very quickly, should students who are the children of undocumented immigrants be allowed to get tuition to public universities?
Are these children born on American soil, or are they?
No, some of them, maybe they came over, they could be dreamers, you know, they came over when they were 3 years old.
I would say the people who are in the United States illegally should not receive the benefits of citizenship, including driver's licenses and in-state tuition.
So if you saw the movie Underwater Dreams, I don't know if anybody here saw this, about the robotics team in Phoenix, Latino robotics team, they beat, a high school team beat MIT in the robotics competition, and then, you know, they were deported and thrown out of school because
You know,
they were dreamers. You think that's moral?
Look,
Well, leading question.
yeah,
It's a
what we
leading
can
question.
do, we can also stack, I mean, one of the things that, this is not a Trump debate, as you said. So I'm not here with a parade of immigrant murders and immigrant crimes and all the things that are bad, which is another, that there are 11 million people, and you will find a range of characteristics, some very good, some very bad. The question is, do you enforce laws or not? Or do you create a system that is entirely lawless? And lawless is what we have now. So my answer would be the benefits of citizenship, that when citizens pay taxes to offer very cheap university tuition, they don't offer that to the planet. And by the way, if you ask them to, you would collapse the consent. If you care about the social insurance system, and I'm a Republican. I'm sort of not as conservative a Republican as I used to be, and as most of. But I actually have come to feel since 2008 that the social insurance system is really important to developed countries. It's really indispensable. And maintaining consent for that has proven, both in the United States and Europe, much more difficult post-2008 than it used to be. And one reason is that when you ask some to pay for others, that is always going to be more challenging as you broaden the sphere on whom you make that demand. If you have a society that is highly cohesive, Bernie Sanders' beloved Denmark, the ask gets comparatively easy. If you say, we want to tax you to provide cheap university tuition to the planet, the ask gets harder. And if you want to sustain these things, you have to say, we're taxing you for the benefit of your fellow citizens.
So let me just ask you a final question before we open it up. Is it fair to native-born Americans for social policy to evolve as much as it does around these questions related to immigrants? Isn't there a forgotten man and woman that we're hearing from now, Sanders voters and Trump voters, who feel that they've been left out, not just because there hasn't been the investment that you described, but also because the debate has not been about them. The debate has been about others.
Absolutely agree that the debate needs to be about all of us. It needs to be about that man and that woman who believes that it needs to be about the student who has a student loan that is making life really unaffordable. It needs to be about the homeowner who is about to lose their home. So yes, absolutely, it needs to be about all of that, and we're starting to hear some of that in the
But doesn't
presidential
David
debate.
make a good point that you undermine the social contract, the consensus, and we're seeing this in this election, support for these social programs, if there isn't some, a more rational approach?
So I think 2 points, Jonathan. I think, again, this is probably the topic for a different debate, which is about the social contract. Our country has failed U.S. citizens. There is no social contract that is helping people survive on a day-to-day basis, and that is true across the board on so many issues. People are struggling, and we need to come up with a new social contract. Second, though, and the tuition equity, or this in-state tuition, is a perfect example. People think about it as undocumented immigrants, the dreamers, are getting something that others are not. We at the National Immigration Law Center have drafted those state bills. Guess what? The way that they're drafted are to benefit any student who can prove that they have been living in that state for X number of years, that they've graduated from high school, etc. It benefits U.S. citizens, for example, who may have moved from the state of Nevada to California and graduated from high school, etc. And it benefits the undocumented immigrant that has been in the state of California since age 3 or 4. So it isn't a special benefit just for undocumented immigrants over U.S. citizens. It actually benefits everyone. And that's what I believe we at the National Immigration Law Center believe from a social policy perspective, from a social insurance perspective. We should be looking at policies that lift the floor for everyone.
Okay, we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Yes, sir.
I'm Michael Myers. I'm the executive director of the New York Civil Rights Coalition, the other Michael Myers.
And you did all that work on tobacco. Is that right? No?
Different.
Okay, different, Mike.
My question is to Marielena. You never answered Jonathan's first question. Jonathan's first question was, is there a limit? Back to that question. America should embrace the document and expand the agreement. Are there limits? If there's 500 million people in Nigeria who all want to come to Disneyland, the United States, what does the United States do with respect to limits, rational policy? And in that regard, what about David's point about the rule of law? We have laws. You either enforce the laws or you ignore the laws and you open your borders to anybody and everybody based on an issue of fairness. So with respect to New York, California, all these sanctuary cities, nobody, including Obama, is enforcing the law.
So, Michael, excellent question. I'm sorry if I didn't make it as articulate enough. Of course there are limits. In fact, there are limits today. There are legal visas. There's a limit to the number of people who can come. It's capped about 1 million. It's been that for a number of years. So yes, what I was suggesting was that we should be updating our immigration system on an ongoing basis every few years, every 5 years, based on labor market, foreign policy, trade, environmental, a whole host of issues. We shouldn't wait 25 years or longer to update our system. So yes, there should be limits. What that number is, we need to come together. Policymakers need to do their job that they were elected for and figure out what is the right limit and what's the, how do we manage migration. Second, immigration laws are being enforced. Despite what the rhetoric is, Michael, guess what? Let me just tell you what is happening in this country. You and I are paying over $18 billion every single year on border and interior enforcement. That is more than every federal law enforcement agency combined. Think about that. That is more than the FBI, the ATF, US Marshals, Secret Service. We are spending more on border and interior enforcement, yet the rhetoric out there is that President Obama is not enforcing the laws. I mean, that is just absurd. It's just not the fact.
How about sanctuary cities where localities decide that they won't enforce the law? I asked David of a question if an issue of a policy was moral.
Yep.
Isn't that extra legal?
No. So sanctuary cities, just to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about, is law enforcement agents, sheriffs, police chiefs have made decisions at the local level or city councils that they want to make sure that there's a community policing aspect and that there is confidentiality so that immigrants are coming forward to report crimes, whether they were a victim or a witness of a crime. And that's important, especially this day and age when we're having conversations about communities of color not trusting the police for many reasons. So sanctuary cities or police safety or community trust policies, these are all local laws that have been upheld by courts. They're found to be legal. It basically says if a person is undocumented, they should come forward, they can come forward to report a crime as a victim or a witness, regardless of what their immigration status, and that law enforcement is not going to then turn them over to immigration, to the immigration authorities for that. And many localities have decided that that is a better approach than actually undermining that trust of local communities in the police.
And contrary to Ted Cruz, it might also be helpful in getting information on terrorism, say from
Absolutely.
people who've overstayed their visas.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Larry East from the Politics Department. We know from polls that this audience is. I'm sorry. Okay. Is that working? Yeah. We know from the poll we took at the outset that this audience is strongly in favor of the motion. And we know that academics are strongly in favor of expanding immigration. We also know from outside polls that the public is strongly against, and we also see that in the campaign. So my question is, why don't we have a motion to reduce immigration?
So I will leave that up to the organizers about whether that could be a future debate. But actually, speaking of polls, just yesterday, there was a poll that shows that Republicans, not academics, not the people in this room, but that Republicans under 30 overwhelmingly support a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. And specifically, 63% of Republicans under 30 said they support giving immigrants a chance to become citizens if they meet certain requirements, and only 20% of them actually would identify them and deport them. And so this is
The problem is that
Republicans.
there are not very many of them. Otherwise, we wouldn't be
Republicans?
having Republicans under 30. We wouldn't be
Yes, and I
having
think-
the kind of political season that we are, if there
Right.
was a significant number of people.
And that is the future of the Republican Party, though. I think that is one of the important pieces of this recent poll that was just conducted.
Yes.
Hi, my question is actually directly to David, and I first want to start by saying that I am an immigrant from South America and came here undocumented, and so did my mother. And by the way, I'm a college graduate and have over 50,000 income, and I'm sure that my taxes cover a lot of things, and I do not get public health insurance. And so two things around what you said tonight is, one, that you're against family reunification. And so I want you to tell me why at the age of 12, I didn't have a right to reunify with my mother, who was already here, and yes, crossed the border, and yes, was able to fix her status, and her income currently is also over 50,000 a year. Two, you also don't believe in low-wage workers. So I want to know what is your plan for farm workers, people who are picking your vegetables, the people who are probably parking your cars, and the people who are probably serving you at the restaurant that you go. Whether you know or not the immigration status of these folks, I will assure you that the majority of them are undocumented or documented or in the process of fixing the status. But I just want to know what is your option for all these two, family and workers.
Well, let me start with the second question. Farm workers are a vanishingly small part of the low-wage workforce in the United States. This is a workforce that is about, as you said, it's about the restaurant industry. It is about, it's increasingly about construction, and it's, by the way, and it's moving up the value chain, and that is where the displacement is happening. One of the reasons that immigration is popular with people in the top third of the income distribution is it genuinely made a lot of goods and services a lot cheaper. That's one of the benefits, that's true. It just has costs, and so my purpose here tonight is to direct your attention to the costs. The benefits, people like the people in this room are going to be very familiar with. The costs are going to be largely invisible to us. As to the point about family reunification, as I said, we have now very broad categories of family reunification. I don't know why siblings should be able to sponsor siblings. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And the sponsorship of parents, I think has to be handled with great care if those parents are going to pose a cost to the American taxpayer. If you become an immigrant to the United States, that means you pledge your fortune to the country. Does it give you the right also to say, and now the United States, you also acquire the right to pay for my two parents Medicare, who arrived at the country at the age of 62 and who have never paid into the system? That, I think, is a much more troubling question. Should parents be able to sponsor spouses? Should husbands and wives be able to sponsor each other? Should parents be able to sponsor children? I think the answer to that is clearly yes. But I think in all of this question, I mean, the way you began that question is, at some level, who are we doing all of this for? In whose interest should the immigration system be run? And there is often a premise they should be run in the interests of non-Americans, of people outside the United States. This is an American public policy. And like all other American public policies, obviously, as the founders of the country said, the United States owns a decent respect of the opinions of mankind. This is a global leader with global responsibilities, but these kinds of domestic policies are run, or should be run, for the interests of Americans. And so my answer to your question is, no, you didn't have that right. You achieved that benefit, congratulations, thank you for your contributions to the country. But rights are something that citizens can claim against the laws of the country they are citizens of.
Just on the second part of that question, because I think this is a part of the debate we've been a little bit light on. So do you believe that if we had less immigration, that there would be native-born Americans would be mowing the grass in the suburbs and, you know, raking the leaves, and that those jobs would be taken by native-born Americans, or do you believe that those native-born Americans don't want those jobs and are going on disability or something in order not to take them?
I think in a world in which we had less low-skilled immigration, we'd see two trends. One is I think we'd see the wage of a lot of jobs go up. And that would mean some of us would be mowing our own laws. But yes, landscaping and things like that, wages would tend to rise, and they would attract more native-born Americans. I think the second thing we would see, and we're going to see this anyway, and this is one of the reasons I have so much apprehension about current policy, is a huge wave of investment in labor-saving technology. Anyone who travels abroad notices the United States is a real laggard. You know, in Europe, they do not have parking lot attendants. In Europe, parking has been automated. In Australia, they do not have people picking by hand all of the fruits that are picked by hand in the United States. That's one of the reasons why American wages lag, is because of this lag in capital investment to save labor, because labor is not only cheap, but in real terms getting cheaper all the time.
Time for a couple more. Yes. You.
Okay. So we're looking at this from a question of America should embrace the undocumented and expand immigration question. My question is, how do both of you feel about United States city municipal ID card programs and any relevant protections offered by them? You mentioned that this is an American public policy issue, but there seem to be different policy issues from city to city. And I wonder if either of you could just speak to that for a moment. And I think you mentioned some of the protections that, like you said, police protections in the event of domestic violence, abuse, and safety. And there was also sanctuary cities, related issue.
And can you just clarify, because I'm not sure that I heard you say national ID card?
No, municipal ID
Municipal
cards.
ID card, got it. Yeah, so I think there are a couple of ways to look at this. Municipal ID cards, or even a driver's license, or a state ID or state driver's licenses, provide a number of different things. From one perspective, it's public safety. Frankly, look, if I get into a car accident in California, it doesn't matter to me what the immigration status of the person. I want to make sure they have insurance that covers the damages, right? Or that they're able to pay whatever the medical costs are, if there are any. So it's from a public safety perspective, really critical. Second, it's also about identity. What we have heard from DACA-mented, right? So these are from the dreamers who have been able to obtain DACA, this temporary deferral of their deportation, and now have work authorization and have been able to get a driver's license, is that for the first time, that driver's license, which many of us take for granted, actually gives them a sense of dignity, a sense that they finally are being acknowledged, that they actually belong to this society, a country that they call their own, that this is the only country that they know. This is the country they call home, and are waiting, right? They are Americans in waiting. They're waiting for our immigration system to catch up and provide them that path to citizenship. So municipal IDs is similar. At the local level, it's to be able for individuals to be able to identify themselves, whether it's to a law enforcement agent or to a government agency, like enrolling children in school or something like that. So all of them are very important integration methods.
So I used moderator's prerogative to waive the closing statements because I thought we were getting so much out of the discussion that I didn't want to go to the conventional closing statement. But we do want to have people, before we go back to your cell phones and vote once more if you can, see whether anybody's changed their minds. And I guess in the meantime, in lieu of a closing statement, I would ask you in 30 seconds to say what, if you could have one thing each, David, you first, as a takeaway. If this audience could take away one thing tonight, what would it be?
Think about costs as well as benefits, and think about the way that the world has changed since 1913, and that the future of migration is not going to be like the past. We all have reverence for our grandparents and great-grandparents. We don't make public policy on the basis of things we remember from a century ago.
Marielena.
So gonna say two things. I think we've talked a little bit about family unity tonight. Not enough, because I think that is a big part about embracing undocumented immigrants. Family reunification is a core American value. I think the other thing, and I think when we think about immigration policy, really making sure that we're keeping that in mind, definitely the costs and benefits are important, and I continue to believe, and the majority of Americans believe, that the benefits outweigh the costs. And finally, and this is not just for tonight's vote, but frankly for November's vote, we really need to ensure, we're living some dangerous times when fear is partially what's fueling the immigration debate, and we need to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistakes we've made throughout history. Some of the most darkest moments in our civil rights history has been when we have targeted people because of their ethnic backgrounds, such as Japanese internment. To think that we may end up there, depending on the November elections, that we may round up and detain millions of people in our country is a dangerous time. So your vote tonight is important, but most importantly, your vote in November is critical.
Thank you so much. We've got some scores in. Looks like David Frum did convince at least some people here. It's now 79% yes, 18% no. This has been a absolutely first-rate debate. I think we've illuminated a lot of issues. Thank you so much. Thank you. Nice job. Nice job.